There's an Spider-Man and a Spider-Man and a Spider-Man.
A-D-N.
It's Headphones Neil! With that terrible bumper, welcome to Headphones Neil Reviews. I'm your host, as always, Headphones Neil, bringing you my review for Spider-Man No Way Home. So I'll still stick a spoiler alert warning on this particular episode in case you still haven't seen the movie yet. There is going to be plenty of spoilers because there is a lot that has happened with this movie that's of particular importance, especially with the end credits scene. If you're not a supporter of the Patreon, then be sure to stay tuned after the episode for a special bonus episode that's exclusively for patrons only. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. So as I mentioned, this review is for Spider-Man No Way Home. And overall, I want to say that watching the film a couple weeks after release and hearing all the hype that went into it, the movie lives up to the hype that I had heard. There was one scene that I had heard about early on in the film, supposedly the gasp-worthy kitchen scene. I'm not sure if it's the initial scene with the lawyer Matt Murdock that shows up to help Happy Hogan and Peter out of their troubles as far as all the damage and devastation that had been caused, or if it was the special scene later on with the three Spider-Men working together, and essentially the understanding that the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man came up to, as far as the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man having lost his Mary Jane, but seeing the MJ of the Tom Holland one together, or the loss of Gwen Stacy and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. So both scenes were equally effective. I wasn't really expecting the Daredevil connection, but it was interesting to see that him show up as far as a connection there, and being a lawyer and recommending a lawyer that's outside of his pay grade or experience range or something like that. But that was a nice little cameo to see that. Of course, the biggest feature of this particular film, so when you're watching the trailer and you do see the events of Peter Parker trying to make people forget via Doctor Strange's spell, and then all of a sudden Dr. Octopus shows up and then Green Goblin show up, so of course you're gonna wonder and semi-expect the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man at least to show up, and then potentially, or why not stop there and go all the way and have Andrew Garfield show up. And then of course, me being me, it was one of those things where I was going into the film trying not to expect them to show up, and just being a standalone Tom Holland Spider-Man film, but then also one of those things where, because you have Doctor Strange and dealing with the multiverse, that you would expect them to show up, so it kind of became a whole thing that you're gonna expect Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield to show up, because if you have the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus showing up, then why not have a proper complete crossover? So sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And I want to say the potential to mess that up was high, but being the MCU, you know that they would have carried them over and dealt with them very well. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, that they brought them over well with Ned creating portals and then bringing the other alternate reality Spider-Man over to the Tom Holland Spider-Man universe. So when you see them overall, I was also expecting to that point that once you have them interact, it would be a brief scene, but seeing all the Spider-Man work together to defeat the villains, to turn them over to the good side, and then essentially send them back was all good stuff, especially as far as having a redemption arc between the Spider-Man and their respective villains. So I thought that was all handled very well. And I like that they kept the poses, or like the hero poses of the individual Spider-Man unique to each of them. So you could tell them apart more than just by their individual Spider-Man suit. So that being said, the biggest gasp-worthy moment of this movie was the loss of Aunt May. So this was definitely something that was built up very well and treated very well, to have that sense of loss and personal sense of loss and anguish for the Tom Holland Spider-Man. So if for example, Ned or Mary Jane had been lost in either any one of the films, it would have been one of those things that's still sad, but not quite as saddening and cringeworthy, or not cringeworthy, but not quite as saddening as the loss of Aunt May that we had. And it is on par with the loss of Uncle Ben in the Tobey Maguire franchise. I actually do need to go back and see the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man relationship with the Aunt May and Uncle Ben of his universe, to see how that is potentially dealt with, just because I don't remember and what happened there. So that's something that I expect to visit and look into a little bit more. But I want to say, with all the stuff that happened in this film, it all was handled and balanced very well, especially with all of that stuff, and then Peter Parker via Tom Holland having to fight with Doctor Strange and sending him off into his own, whatever that mirror universe thingy was, so that he could fulfill the wishes of Aunt May. To the point where it was a very interesting correlation that they dealt with the whole loss of Aunt May and Peter dealing with her dying, believing that anyone can be turned from dark to light. So the obvious connection is Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, that Luke steadfastly believed that Anakin would come back. So that was the first parallel. But then the other parallel was, for me, was from Avengers 1, where with Phil Coulson and Sam Jackson as Nick Fury, that Agent Coulson died believing in the Avengers Initiative and that the heroes could come together to fulfill a purpose greater than themselves. So I kind of got those parallels here between Peter Parker and Aunt May, that Aunt May died believing that all these people who are supposedly bad could be redeemed because they were good at some point. So I generally liked that whole presentation, and ultimately with Green Goblin being the first villain to be created, that he was the last person and the most out there as far as villains to be redeemed. Even though Dr. Octopus was there, he was kind of in the middle with Sandman and Electro. Whoever the Jamie Foxx character were probably the easiest to bring back, and then Dr. Octopus in the middle. So in general, that's really all for this particular review. Overall, it's very well done. As far as the end credits go, the one with Venom was kind of interesting just to tie it in to, I guess, welcome him into the MCU. But the second end credits scene was probably the better of the two, just because we're now connecting the events of Spider-Man No Way Home into Doctor Strange 2 and the Multiverse of Madness. So we kind of get, as far as I can tell from that end credit scene, that the spells and the stuff that Doctor Strange had to do is going to lead him down to down a very dark path, because he's pulling in extra power than he's able to, or is considered possible, or maybe it's within his grasp and power, but it's more than he's ready to deal with. And this kind of also draws a parallel to my mind in the Star Wars Legends universe, where Luke, in his continued use of the Force, ultimately kept drawing on more and more Force, and in order to learn more aspects of the Force, ultimately turned to the dark side. And it was only his love of Leia and Han and all the stuff that was good that brought him back. So one of those things where we'll see how it's handled there and how that split between Doctor Strange and evil Doctor Strange is played out. But one of those things where we see that he uses the same technique as the last Sorcerer Supreme with the Hulk, but Doctor Strange uses that with Peter Parker, who basically swims his way back into his body. So that was a particularly light moment that I enjoyed. So overall, it's a very good film, definitely worth watching. I like how they handled all the different Spider-Man and all the different villains, to the point where I did in general enjoy the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films, to the point where I now want to go back and rewatch those films just to see how they hold up after all this time, see how they compare to the Tom Holland film. But to me, I enjoyed all of them, so I kind of want to do a compare and contrast between all three. So that's all there is for this particular review. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, or anything like that, you can comment on this post on Twitter at PatelN01. The website is headphonesneil.reviews for past episodes, subscription links, supporting the show, and all of that good stuff. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, if you become a patron of the show at patreon.com/PatelN01, you'll get a bonus review after this episode. Notably, if you're interested for Venom Let There Be Carnage, so look out for that on the patron side. So thanks for tuning into this particular episode, and until next time.